When we think of a monster, we probably picture something lurking in the shadows of some far-off Gothic castle. But here's the thing. Some of the most monstrous figures in history, they weren't hiding in the shadows. They were living right next door, hiding behind a mask of total, absolute normalcy. So how is that even possible? Let's take a closer look.
I mean, listen to this. That was the reaction from Ed Gein's neighbor in Plainfield, Wisconsin, right after the police discovered what was inside his house. And this feeling, this complete and utter disbelief, it's a pattern you see again and again in the stories of the world's most notorious killers.
And that really brings us to the central terrifying question, doesn't it? How can someone capable of such unspeakable evil put on such a convincing show? How do they walk among us completely and totally undetected?
Okay, so to even begin to wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the stark duality they presented to the world, this mask of normalcy versus the horrifying truth it was hiding.
The contrast it's jarring. On one hand, you have Ed Gein, the quiet, helpful handyman. And then there's John Wayne Gacy, Pogo the Clown, a guy who was beloved at community events and children's parties. But behind those closed doors, their homes were literal houses of horrors, filled with the remains of their victims. That public face, it was a carefully, meticulously crafted illusion.
So that begs the question, right? Were these men just born evil, or did something make them that way? To even start to explore that, we have to go back, way back to the beginning, and look at the common threads of trauma that really define their early lives.
Our source material points to this really startling physical pattern. Richard Ramirez, he was struck in the head twice when he was a kid. John Wayne Gacy also suffered a head injury. It's this detail that just keeps popping up, and it really makes you wonder, could a physical trauma actually be a trigger for the psychological horrors that followed?
And if the physical trauma is one piece of the puzzle, well, the psychological poison is the other. Just look at this. Gein's mother taught him that all women were evil, pure evil. Gacy's father was an alcoholic who just relentlessly belittled him. Ridgway's relationship with his mother was so twisted that he started having fantasies of killing her when he was in the 4th grade. And Ramirez, at 13 years old, he watched his cousin, a Vietnam vet, shoot his wife right in front of him. Each story is just a different recipe for profound dysfunction.
So with that kind of background, it starts to make a little more sense how their actions could escalate to such an unimaginable scale. We're not talking about isolated incidents here. We're talking about systematic campaigns of terror.
29. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how many boys and young men John Wayne Gacy murdered and then buried in the crawl space of his quiet suburban Chicago home. They found 26 bodies there, with others just disposed of in a nearby river.
49. That is the confirmed number of women murdered by Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. For decades, he terrorized the Seattle area, and he claims the real number is much, much higher.
13. That's how many murders Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was convicted of during his brutal satanic rampage across Los Angeles in the summer of 1985. He would break into homes totally at random, terrorizing entire communities.
And even though we tend to group them together, their methods were chillingly distinct. You can see it here. Gacy was a predator who used trust, offering jobs to lure his victims. Ridgway targeted the vulnerable, women he found along a specific stretch of highway. Ramirez was just pure chaos, driven by a sadistic impulse. And Gein was in a category all his own. He was a ghoul, obsessed with trying to recreate his dead mother.
So when these guys were finally caught, it wasn't just an arrest. No, it was the moment the mask was finally ripped away, revealing the monster underneath. And it sent massive shockwaves through their communities and across the entire nation.
Ramirez's reign of terror ended in a pretty incredible way. It wasn't some big police shootout. It ended because his face was plastered everywhere. When he tried to carjack a vehicle in East LA, residents recognized him from the newspapers. They literally chased him down, beat him with a metal bar, and held him until the police arrived. The very community he terrorized was the one that brought him down.
Now for Gacy, the unmasking was a much slower, much grimmer process. As police started digging under his house, the true scale of his evil was unearthed, one body at a time. That awful smell his wife had been complaining about for years, it was finally explained in the most horrific way you could possibly imagine.
The impact of these killers extends so much further than their actual crimes. They forced a radical shift in our culture, our laws, and our deepest fears. Just think about Ed Gein for a second.
His real-life atrocities were so uniquely bizarre, the skin suit, the obsession with his mother, that they became the direct blueprint for some of cinema's most terrifying villains. Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, all of them have a little piece of Gein's DNA.
And this was a huge deal. Think about it. Before Gein, who were the movie monsters? They were from some faraway land, right? Frankenstein, Dracula. Gein gave us a brand new and, honestly, a much more terrifying archetype. Suddenly, the monster was the quiet guy from Middle America. The killer could literally be your neighbor.
Gacy's crimes completely shattered the myth of suburban safety. The idea that evil couldn't thrive behind a white picket fence was gone. Cases like his forced the term serial killer into our vocabulary and made law enforcement develop brand new profiling techniques. And tragically, these events also led to vital changes in policy, like the Missing Child Recovery Act, which finally got rid of that 72-hour waiting period to report a missing child.
All of this brings us right back to that ultimate question, which is captured so perfectly in these conflicting views on Ed Gein. Was he the product of a horrific upbringing, a vacuum that created a monster? Or, as one psychiatrist who actually interviewed him believed, was he simply born evil?
So what truly creates a monster? Is it a damaged brain, a poisoned childhood, or is it something darker, something we just can't quite define? The truth is, we still don't have a simple answer, and that uncertainty, well, that's perhaps the most unsettling legacy of all.